All right. Excited today to have Ryan Sapena on the Tricer podcast. Ryan is the marketing director at Seek Outside. If you don't know who Seek is, they are like the industry leader in teepees and ultralight shelters for backpacking with a big hunting focus. So, Ryan, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, man. I'm super excited. Glassing, glassing is probably my favorite aspect of hunting. So I'm stoked to get in and talk with you guys here.
Yeah, we could talk about glassing a little bit today if you want, but yeah, I have a thing for glassing if you can't tell.
Yeah,
So
no
I,
doubt.
I typically spend 8 to 10 hours a day in the glass when I'm hunting. So I
Yeah,
absolutely love it more than anything. More than anything I do, I like to glass. Like I would probably never kill an animal again and choose glassing over killing an animal. So
dude, that is so funny. That's me too. I'll even take my setup out with my wife when we're just going on a hike, going fishing or something like that. Planning on having a little picnic. I'll just bring it and there's a nice basin or a vista that I can check out, I will be on that. It's awesome. I just love seeing
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, isn't it? It's shocking when you go and do something like that. How many people are hiking right by animals that don't even know they're there, right?
Oh yeah,
In these areas.
yeah.
So I'm like, I go to the gym pretty much every day and I ride my bike almost daily now, but I'll go mountain biking and I always just throw a tripod on my backpack
Hmm.
and I'll ride out in the hills, find a spot, read my Bible, and I'll glass for like 30 minutes, in the morning, a couple days a week. And this is like in an area that you can't hunt, but there's deer in there, right? And it's just fun to sit down and look for animals. And it's like anything, right? It's like shooting your bow or shooting your rifle. Like, you can only it doesn't hurt you to glass. It actually helps you get better. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at finding animals. And honestly, I kind of like looking at those unpressured ones and kind of understanding a little better too. You can see see them, how they're acting naturally and stuff.
That is a good point. There's something special about just observing an animal. Yeah, especially like if you're looking at mule deer, you'll be glassing an area for 30 minutes or whatever, 30 minutes, 6 hours, and in one spot that you've been looking at constantly, an animal just you just see a butt or you see the side of an animal pop out, and it's just like, for me it's super cool to just look at animals, observe them. It's a very, like, glassing to me is a very zen thing, right? You're not
Mm-hmm.
thinking of anything else. It's very similar to like shooting your bow without the mechanical aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you just it's really cool. It's awesome, and having a good tripod makes all the difference.
Makes all the difference. Have you hunted coos deer yet?
I have not. No.
Oh man, you got to go hunt coos deer.
Yeah.
Those are my by far my favorite. I mean, that's kind of what sparked everything Tricer does is coos deer.
Really.
But you haven't glassed until you glassed looking for coos deer, man. Those little boogers, it's so fun. You got to go do it. It's like the my number one, like the lot. Pick one animal would be coos deer for me.
Really.
And you get up there and you're looking for this little deer. Talk about something that you could not only like you look at some area and all of a sudden there's one there 6 hours later. You could see one standing on its feet, blink, it'll disappear, and you won't see him for another 3 hours, but he was sitting right there. And you're looking
uh,
at him with $6,000 BTX, and you don't see him because they just blend it. They call him the gray ghost for a reason.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
they're
coos
like the
deer.
size of a rabbit, essentially.
They're
So
super small. Yeah, like around 100, 110 pounds. The ones I've been hunting in Sonora, I've been
yeah.
going to Sonora now. They're about 120.
Okay.
The mature deer. It's been really cool getting to hunt down there a little bit too and kind of learn about them. And you start realizing a mature buck is about 120 pounds, like buck over four.
Hmm.
I think the reason why the deer are so small in Arizona is we're killing deer that are 3 years old and
Yeah.
younger. They just don't. They start putting on some mass. And I have some friends who are really they guide down there and I've been learning from them and you start measuring like the width of the ears and the head, and you start realizing like, wow, that head is bigger on these animals as they get more mature. I think the same thing goes for mule deer too, right? I mean, the older they get, the bigger their body's going to get, and get more
Oh
mature.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, especially body size. I feel like that's the big one for me. Uh, get into November. I mean, obviously the extra fur that they got kind of helps helps make that a big difference. But me and my buddy were mule deer hunting this year, and He shot one that was, I don't know, it was probably three, 3.5, 3.5 years old. Not, it was a good buck, but I shot one that was probably past its prime, starting to regress. But the body on that thing was, I mean, it was, I don't think I'd ever like hunted with somebody else and killed two deer like on back to back days to where you can really, kind of see the
Mhm.
size difference. But it was shocking. It was like, man, this one's got a body on it, and it had it was definitely worn and weathered, but it was crazy to see that size difference there between a young buck and the old guy.
Yeah, it's a good way to judge, especially, I mean, mule deer are a little bit easier, right? Because it's just like their racks are just much bigger.
Yeah,
With a coos deer, a 110-inch buck, you're shooting them pretty much every day. That's
yeah,
a huge. That's a Boone and Crockett buck, 110, right? Um, so it's like it can get really hard to field judge a difference between a 100-inch and a 108-inch buck,
oh
right?
yeah,
And you can do your best, but the body size really does help. Start looking at that stuff. Just everything adds to it. There's like measurements you can take from like the shoulder to the brisket, and the neck length and neck girth, and there's just things to look at when you start. I mean, when you start falling in love with these animals, you start to understand their anatomy. It really helps more than just like, oh, look at that rack. You know,
yeah.
it's just
I
another
can see
tool,
that.
another thing to have in your quiver when you're trying to judge an animal and see how big it is. So, enough about deer. Tell me about Seek, man. I have your silver tip tent.
Hmm.
I'm probably going to get one of your Cimarrons this year with a stove, unless you talk me into a different one. Um, I love it. I've used it on a bunch of hunts. I've used it on some extended, like 8 to 10 day fly-in hunts. Great tent, or great. Do you guys call them tents, teepees, both?
I feel like we call them shelters.
Shelter. Okay, great
Yeah,
shelter. There you go.
yeah, yeah.
It's a great shelter. Um, so tell me about Seek. When did you guys start? Where are you guys located? Who are you guys making stuff for?
Yeah, so we're Seek Outside. We're based out of Grand Junction, Colorado, on the western slope here. Started in 2010, so we've been in business for about 14 years now. And Yeah, I mean, shoot, man, we make shelters, tents, whatever you want to call them. We even make tarps.
Tarps.
I don't know. It's tough because like when you say tent, most people think of like your traditional half dome. It's got
Hmm.
aluminum cross stays going through it, and there's a floor sewn in and all that stuff. So I think that's why we tend to go with shelter, because ours are a little bit different. We make teepees was kind of how we got started, which was creating a floorless teepee, running a titanium stove in there. It was kind of the impetus for that was really our founders, both Kevin and Angie. They are big hunters, and they got to a point where they just wanted to be a little bit more comfortable back there. And obviously, the teepee's been around for a long time, but we were kind of on the forefront of getting that titanium stove, the ultralight titanium stove, that you can throw in that shelter. And for like with that Cimarron, for example, you got a tent and a stove for 5.5, 6 to 7 pounds, depending on what stove you get. Which I always say, the weight savings there are relative, right? Because if you're running like some ultralight Dyneema, Durston tent or something like that, it's going to be a little bit heavier. But if you're running your typical half dome tent before you switch over to like the Cimarron and stove, you're actually probably going to be saving weight.
Hmm.
That TP design allows you to have a lot more square footage for the weight, just because you're running the one center pole. Um, the floorless aspect of it is great for hunters. Those shoulder seasons that you're typically going out, you're dealing with moisture, you're dealing with snow, you're dealing with mud. In a standard tent that's got the floor sewn in there, you have to take your boots off before you crawl in, and it's just I personally think that the floorless route is much more conducive to hunting. And like when you're hunting, man, the last thing you want to have to worry about is being clean out there, right? You're spending long days, um, early wake ups. You don't want to have to worry about keeping your tent floor clean. So that's why I really enjoy the floorless. But however, a lot of people do like that floor, so we do also make flooring options for all of our shelters. I just typically prefer the floorless. So yeah, we make our stuff for backcountry hunters. We also make backpacks as well, hunting backpacks and recreational backpacks. But primarily, we make our stuff. Hunters kind of picked it up in the early days because it was a way to make those late season mule deer hunts, make those early spring bear hunts, elk hunts, whatever you want, make them easier. One of the best parts about having a stove in there is the morale boost you get, right? You don't have to worry
Mhm.
about, I mean, back in the day, when I was a little kid, we used to stay in a tent trailer that didn't have propane or anything in our hunting spot. And then later we kind of did some more tent camping. But that was like the one thing that you always dreaded at the end of the day was getting back into that tent and having to crawl into a cold sleeping bag. And in the morning, you wake up and you're cold and there's like that 10 seconds in between putting your pants on where you have to get out of the sleeping bag. So I think hunters picked up the hot tent because of that reason, because it just makes it so much more comfortable in the backcountry for you at a weight penalty that is very minimal.
Yeah, yeah, I'm definitely gonna try the stove, like a TPO the stove this year. It's kind of my one of my things I want to do. I think it definitely has its advantages in a lot of places. I am mixed on the teepees because like I do feel like I get dirtier in there.
Mm,
I'm just using a tarp. We should talk about that a little bit, like what I should be using. 'Cause I'm just using like some cheap Amazon tarp that I got, and I feel like I just constantly getting dirty. Which I
mhm,
mean, on an 8-day hunt, you're gonna get filthy anyways. I mean, you smell so bad, and you're just feel. I mean, there's just dirt on you that's caked on. Uh, so one of my favorite parts of the teepee is having no floor and being able to cook in there. Like I just
mhm.
lay in the tent, get on my sleeping bag after a long day, and I cook right there on the dirt, right? And it's just easy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean the floorless, it's got a lot of benefits. The one downside is you can end up getting a little bit more condensation if you're like pitched up on grass because you do get a lot of that moisture coming up from the grass. And but yeah, I mean, doing things like cooking right in there, like right in your sleeping bag, like especially with the when you have the stove, one of my favorite things to do is uh, just keep a little tinder ball right by the stove, and in the morning, just throw that thing in the stove, get that thing ripping. First off, if you do have any condensation, it's going to burn it off immediately. But it also just makes when you are cooking, when you're making coffee, it just makes it so much easier. You're not trying to like bundle up in your sleeping bag and do like the one arm thing to get your jet
Mhm.
boil going. But yeah, no, that's definitely a big benefit being able to cook right on there and not have to worry about you know pouring boiling water on your $300 tent footprint. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I will
Um,
say just one thing. A lot of guys, you mentioned bringing a tarp to put it down. I would say probably the most popular way to have something almost like a footprint. What a lot of guys do is just Tyvek or house wrap.
yeah, the
Um,
house wrap stuff.
Super light, super cheap. You can beat it up, and it's also a little bit more like it typically
Rigid.
doesn't. The dirt doesn't stick to it as easily. So
It's
I
more
find
rigid too, right? Like it's not as like I feel like my tarp kind of like this will like kind of bunch up on me a little bit, and that's why how I get so dirty.
exactly. Yep.
Tyvek is a little bit more structure to it, maybe, and it just stays out open. I don't know. That's what it seems
Yeah.
like looking at. I need to try and get some of that and try that out this year. Because, like I said, it's in my quiver. I have a thing for tents. I love tents, and I have way too many. Um, so I run it, and I'm going to be running a floorless on a few different hunts this year. Another thing I love about a floorless tent or a teepee style, I'm just focused on teepees right now. We can look at the other stuff too, is there's a lot of room. Like you're basically in the vestibule. Like
Hmm.
I'm a big with hunting. Like if a tent doesn't have a vestibule, like you could take your big Agnes tents and it's like they're useless to me because there's
Hmm.
no vestibule, right? And you have like it's not just you, it's you, your rifle, your bow, your backpack, all this stuff. You need a place for that to be because putting it outside, it's going to get hammered in the mountains. It's going to rain, it's going to snow, it's going to get. You need a place for it. And with a teepee, you just have such a big footprint.
Hmm.
to keep your stuff in there.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of them, not the silver tip, but some of the bigger ones, you can stand up, like to put your pants on and stuff like that, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're basically just a big vestibule, and they're kind of designed like a circle, right? That's the
Hmm.
general shape of them. You can do so much with that space.
Hmm.
It's a very it's a very useful kind of design, and with the teepee, like I kind of mentioned earlier, you're getting that style is the best space to weight ratio out there, just because you're limiting so many ounces or pounds, whatever kind of tent you have, in those poles, in the extra fabric that it takes to make the loops to put the poles in. So you're getting so much more space for both the price tag and the weight that you're carrying in.
Yeah, and one thing I love about the teepee is it's literally just one fabric, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
no windows, there's no zippers, there's no, I mean, there's zippers on the outside, obviously, two zippers, but it's not like there's no cover. It's just no floor. It's just a teepee. And the way I run my system is I don't run bags, so I just stuff it. So I'll take that teepee and I'll just stuff it in like the side pocket of my EXO, right in the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just shove it in there, and it just packs really nice. You're able to stuff them really nice, in my experience.
Definitely, yeah. Well, and here's the thing, man. I mean, the teepee was literally created by Native Americans for the mobile hunter. Like before the horse got
Mhm.
to North America, there was a lot of wigwams. There was a lot of mounds. They didn't, at least to my knowledge, they didn't necessarily have the teepee. That was specifically an innovation so that they could have something that they could just take down real quick. It packs up small. They don't have to haul around a whole structure so that they could chase the bison herd. So it's in essence, I mean, it is like really the hunter's shelter.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and they are light. So like we actually have the same elk tag this year. I won't say the unit or
hmm
what state we're in. We both have the same elk tag in a state together this year, unplanned. I will likely be spike camping that hunt.
hmm
Um, would the silver tip be the way to go with that, or would I use one of these new structures? 'Cause you guys don't only do teepees. You have a bunch of really bitchin' stuff you're coming out with, and I really love like some of your new drawstring. I haven't got to hold one in hand, but one of some of your drawstring style openings, like no zippers on them. What would you run for that, for like a spike camp?
I mean, it's really just a weight thing, right? I mean, that silver tip is about as light as I think it's about the same as our current two-person shelters that we have. But yeah, the new system that you're talking about is our zipperless design. So it
Mhm.
basically, we just turned one of the guy lines into the zipper. We actually have a patent on it, which is pretty cool. Zippers out in the woods are the one thing that will 100% fail. There's no zipper that's fail proof. You always got to get them repaired, and using that zipperless design kind of mitigates that a little bit. But really, I mean, I don't know, man. That silver tip is pretty sweet. The only reason we have that one discontinued right now is just because we had a couple other in that two-person range, and with us being like we make all of our stuff here in Grand Junction, it's hard to find sewers sometimes. So if you have a bunch of different products in your production, it slows certain things down. So that silver tip, a lot of people like it. I mean, you can run the trekking poles with it. It's pretty sweet. I will say,
Mhm.
like, our new our newer shelter, the Guardian, is kind of what took its place. It's on that zipperless design. Again, it's designed to have make your trekking poles kind of the two center poles if you want. We also have carbon poles that you can buy if you don't want to replace, if you don't want to have to be taking your trekking poles in and out. But that one, it's 32 ounces with the stove jack. The stove jack sits in the vestibule of it, so it doesn't take, like in the silver tip. If you were to have a stove jack, which the silver tip used to be our two-person teepee, if you had a stove jack in there, it would turn that shelter into a one-person. Whereas this new one, the Guardian, it is a true two-person, so you can have two people with the stove for
Really?
32 ounces. It's a pretty sweet one, especially for that time of year. If you're doing archery season, we have a nest for it that sits inside, so you can, if you got ants or even, if you're pitching up at high altitude and you're worried about condensation, That can help. Um, but I don't know. The silver tip is sweet, pretty sweet, and I think we are going to be doing some limited releases of it here coming up throughout the next couple of years. But yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough.
So on the Guardian, I don't know what the proper name is. Would you call it like an A-frame tent? Is that what would you guys call those tents? They're almost like the scout tents, right? They kind of have the poles on both ends, come down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like a almost like a tarp tent, right? Trekking pole shelter is a common term that you'll see for that style, and it's very
Hmm.
common in the ultralight world.
Yeah,
Ultralight backpacking through hikers.
yeah. I want to talk to you about that too next. So
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, that I would like if you were to look it up on Google, trekking pole shelter, the Guardian style would come up.
okay, gotcha.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's I wanted to kind of I was leaning that way with that question is how much of you guys are really doing some innovative stuff. How much of that is coming from you started in the hunting world, which can be a little bit more grit and bear it, like hunting, you know. Now, how much of your influence is coming from this through hiking, right? Because you're bringing that in, and I think that through hiking and backpacking has had a tremendous impact on the hunting space. That's why I say that, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like we're not carrying canvas tents around; we're going ultra light, but it's coming from this other space, right? And bringing it in with the Dyneema and all that stuff. So, how
Mhm.
much influence is coming from that market? Because you didn't start out in that space, right?
It's a huge influence,
Yeah.
and it's becoming more common amongst just outdoor companies in general, right? This whole ultralight movement. I mean, you think about it, especially nowadays with Onyx and some of these big advantages that us as hunters have. You got to go in farther. You got to go in, steeper, get into steeper stuff, and being able to shave, 2.5, 3 pounds off your pack. Ideally, you'd be able to shave more, but like if that's where you're starting with your tent, I mean that's huge. That's a big step. When you are looking at ultralight backpacking, a lot of the weight cuts that you're seeing, if you look up a gear list on Outside Magazine or whatever, a lot of the weight cuts are you're saving 3 ounces here, you're saving 4 ounces here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you can save like a pound and a half or 2 pounds on your tent, that's giant for hunters. So yeah, there's a lot of influence, and actually, Outside Magazine, they actually hit our founder up, Kevin, to do an article talking about how your next great backpack is going to come from a hunting company, and that is because like with hunting, right? You want to go as light as possible, but you're also trudging through oak brush, through down
Mm-hmm.
timber,
Mm-hmm.
bad weather conditions. Some of that ultralight backpacking stuff is not designed for those conditions. So, kind of a big portion of what we do and our ethos as a brand is trying to make the lightest, most comfortable, and most durable thing that we can.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so yeah, there's a ton of influence that comes from that. We have a lot of ultralight backpacking, um, friends of the company. And to be honest with you, like a lot of the people that work at Seek Outside, at least on the customer facing side of things, they're not primarily hunters, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
primarily mountain bikers or ultra runners or rock climbers. But the common thread that we all have is hunting. So I think that aspect allows us to take little pieces of information from this subsect of the recreational crowd. This piece of gear here, this would work great in a hunting platform, and apply it there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have a lot of influences from not just the hunting space there.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you said about ultralight versus durable. Because like with my tripods, they are ultralight, but they're not the lightest, and
Hmm.
but they're stable, right?
Hmm.
So when it comes to like durable and stable, like kind of interchangeable for me. Like I want my tripods to be light, but I want them to also be ultra stable as well. So like you could obviously go and buy a tripod that's lighter and has like super thin legs, but it's not going to be stable, right? So
Yeah.
you could go and buy like I don't know. I'm not picking on Big Agnes. They make great stuff, but a Big Agnes Tiger Wall and it weighs nothing and it's paper thin. But man, get yourself into a freak thunderstorm up on 12,000 foot elevation, and you're gonna have some trouble
Yeah.
in that tent. It's so like there has to be when it comes, especially to hunting, is we're not it, as a general rule, we're not hunting off a trail. We're not hunting off of like in a national park where it's just kind of paved roads.
Yep.
We're hunting in the middle of nowhere, and
Exactly.
stuff can hit the fan, and you need to have a way to stay alive. There are some good stories this year from Colorado of some very experienced dudes getting in some very serious trouble because storms came in. Um, and your guys' stuff holds up to it. I mean, the TPs, like the design of them, like it's like you said, it's been around for thousands of years, and it just holds up to wind and snow and rain really well.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that we'll never compromise on. Like our litmus test, I would say, for our new gear is Alaska, right? Would you take this on a fly-in trip to the north slope of the Brooks Range, where you know
Mhm.
if you get a big windstorm coming in, 50-mile-an-hour gusts, 60-mile-an-hour gusts, um, snow, rain, whatever have you, and a pilot can't get in for 3-4 days? Is this shelter going to be able to hold up to that? And if it doesn't, like, you know, fabrics are a big topic in the tent world right now, and they always
Mhm.
have been, right? We're always trying to get something that's a little bit lighter, a little bit more waterproof, a little bit, less sag,
Durable.
durable, all that stuff. And we, I mean, shoot, we have rows and rows of. That's one of the great things about us being made in America, and like controlling all of our production, is we are able to test all these things like on a whim. So like new fabric comes out, or we see a company that is using this certain fabric, we can be like, okay, let's test that out. And
Mhm.
to be honest with you, like we feel that the stuff that we use is about as good as it gets. But if something else comes along that can stand up to those standards, we will happily change. Right? We just want to make sure that if you're going in on a 7 to 10 day fly-in hunt in Alaska, that this shelter is not going to fail you. And you know something like the center pole, might we design those to break before the tent does, so you might have to be able to find a log or something like that, or a ridge pole to put in the middle. But we don't want that thing to be able to fail and leave you in an SOL situation. So yeah, that's durability is something that we're not willing to compromise. And it's not canvas, right?
Mhm.
If a heavy tree branch falls on it or something like that, you know, I mean, I would say that we've had some pretty gnarly stuff happen to our tents, and they're fine. But it's not Kevlar. But for what it weighs and be able to take it on a backcountry trip, it's about as good as it gets.
Now, so I think mine is sil nylon, right? Is that correct? Like this, the regular brown sil nylon.
Yep.
What are the fabrics you guys are running your tents in now? Your shelters in shelters.
Yes.
Changing the word shelters.
So there's there's a couple things here. So not all sil nylons are created equal, right? And
Okay.
sil nylon is kind of known as around the industry as that's the most durable. Um, that's what Hilleberg uses. That's what Faru uses. It's super durable, but not all of them are created equal, right? So just like in cars, right? You can make a car that looks just like a Toyota Tacoma, but if it doesn't have the same parts, it doesn't have the same frame, it's not built the same way, it's not going to hold up. It's going to look the same, and it might
Mhm.
have the same name, but it's not going to function the same. So there's a couple things there, just a note for anybody that's looking into tents. They're not all created equal. We use Dyneema, and we also just released a Sil Poly tarp. So Dyneema is, like you had mentioned earlier, that's common amongst ultralighters. It's about as strong as you can get. It's got the tensile strength of steel, um, for something that is like super light. It's sub 1 ounce per yard of fabric, which is extremely light. The downside there is, it does run into durability issues long term. You know, the thing about like Dyneema and Silpoly, um, they're two of the fabrics now that are being used heavily, and they're great fabrics, right, for smaller shelters and for, you know, more casual journeys and adventures and stuff like that. But they don't have stretch, and that's one of the big things that Sil Nylon kind of is knocked for. But you think about stretch and like going back to the truck reference, um, a truck frame is built with to have some flex in the frame, right?
Mhm.
Anything that is designed to take to absorb shock or to be rattled around, you want to have some stretch to it. So that's one of the great things about Sil Nylon is it does have some stretch. Now it, you know, it can be saggy in the morning. You just click your pull up and it's good to go. Dyneema, it I kind of compare it to like the Ferrari, right? It's light, it's fast, it's super comfortable. It's not going to be flapping around in the wind, but you do need to kind of baby it a little bit more. You got to store it a certain way so that the weave doesn't get you know, over a long period of time. If you don't store it correctly, it can you know, create little holes in the fabric. Same
Do
with
you
cell
do you
poly.
do you hang them? Is that how you store them?
Ideally, yes.
Okay.
That's if you have the time and the space to hang those things to where there's no crunching, no, you know, folding, nothing like that, that's going to be the best way to do it. We tell people if you roll it up, if you like fold it neatly and then roll it up, you're going to be good. It's minimizing that you know, that abrasion there. So
That's the
yeah,
only way to store it. I mean, if I'm hunting, I can still stuff sack it, right? I mean,
for
or do I?
sure. Yeah,
Okay.
it's really only like over long periods of time, and Sil Nylon doesn't have that issue. Sil Nylon, because of how it's made, you know, it's designed to be, you know, essentially just mashed and punched and whatever you want to do to it. So you don't have to worry about it with that. You really just have to worry about that with Dyneema. Sil Poly, you don't have to worry about that either, just because of the way that the fabrics are made. Dyneema is just a little bit different because it's like a big sheet, instead of actually, you know,
A roll.
not to bore people, but it's a fabric differences there.
Yeah, I think hanging things like I'm looking at you have your sleeping bag behind you. I'm looking at my closet and I have like 5 quilts and sleeping bags hanging right now.
Mm.
Hanging stuff like that is just the way to go to keep it not getting messed up and not getting, you know, you don't want to keep it stuffed, especially with your sleeping bags. You know, you leave them stuffed up in a ball and they're not going to be as warm when you go use them this fall. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
So that makes sense. The tent. I never knew that. Now, so Paul, I did see this tarp. I want to try one of your tarps out, dude. People love
Mm.
those tarps. I typically carry just like a REI, like I think it's like a quarter dome tarp. I don't know, it's only weighs like a pound tarp, but
Mm.
I always have a tarp in my pack no matter what. No matter what I do, there's a tarp in my pack because there's just you can make a shelter with it. You could keep yourself out of the sun with it. You can keep yourself out of the rain with it when rain happens. Um, there's great to have. So that tarp is with Sil Poly. Your shelters aren't Sil Poly, right? Or some of your shelters Sil Poly as well.
Um, no, none of our shelters are so poly. We've kind of been toying with stuff. The thing with at least the types of sil poly that we've been able to get our hands on is like, yes, it doesn't stretch, but when it fails pretty catastrophically. Just, you know, like here in Grand Junction, we've had a freaking windy spring, and we're we're kind of putting together a video, like a hardcore intense study on a bunch of different fabrics that we've tried over the years and that are out there right now. And that's what we found for with sil poly. But on a tarp, it's a little bit different, right? Because you're not and the big thing is just like the tension on the seams.
Mhm.
With a tarp, you really, just because how you use it, you don't run into as many issues. So yeah, the tarp is sil poly, no sag. It's a little bit lighter than our sil nylon. Um, yeah, it's pretty sweet. That sil poly tarp is nice. You save, I think, 3-4 ounces compared to our standard one.
The standard one's like 20 ounces. How much does your standard one weigh?
Yep, 19.5 or something like that.
Yeah, I looked at getting one. I think you might have been sold out, or I couldn't get it fast enough. But I ended up buying this other one. They've been running for a few seasons now. Cool thing about a tarp too is there's like no wrong way to do it. So I mean, I've put tarps in some of the weirdest positions. Like you can tie it to a rock and over to this tree, and then take a stump and post it up on this side, and you could really form fit them to any situation to cover yourself and make a shelter, which is kind of nice.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, a tarp is a staple, and if you're not carrying a tarp, I don't know what you're doing. But like, especially this time of year, like if you're going out for spring bear, man, like it's basically guaranteed that you're going to have some sort of deluge come through and mess your day up. And if you don't have something light that you can just throw up in 45 seconds to a minute to get a little bit of shelter, you're again SOL. But yeah, that is the great thing about tarps. That's why all Alaskan guides, if you check their pack, they might even have two or three of those things put in their pack, just because if you need something, I mean, you can use them as a meat shade, you can use them
Hmm.
as a sun shade. If it's super hot, you got shade there. I'll even take mine out. Like I said earlier, when I'm going with my girlfriend, we take a tarp, and we take actually one of our we have like a half nest, which is basically a little bug shelter, and we'll set that up right by the lake and stand up there, stay up there all day, and it's kind of the perfect combo. So tarps are very, you can use them as a ground sheet, you can use them,
Hmm.
to collect water if you need to. So they're great.
Yeah, I mean, I typically like I'll use them for storing gear as well. Sometimes, like almost
Oh
like a
yeah.
vestibule type thing. I'll just make a little A-frame, two trekking poles, staple that thing down. You're done. And then when I'm in the backcountry, like if I'm on a glass and it's raining or snowing, I'll just run two trekking poles in the front and then kind of like do like a lean-to style right down to something in the back. I always have 100 foot of paracord in my pack, no matter what. 50 foot is not enough, especially when you start hanging quarters and doing stuff. So you just take some, paracord and find something to tie it to, and run a, I don't know what you call that. Like I call it the Boy Scout knot, like that. The slide knots. And you can
Hmm.
tension it up. And tarps are phenomenal. If you don't have a tarp, like I don't know what you're doing. You need to get a tarp. You will not regret having a tarp when it's raining. Rain gear is cool, but it's not cool to sit in the rain. It's
No,
just, yeah.
no. Especially like up in Alaska or something like that, where you can be sitting up in the rain for 3 days straight. And if you got good rain gear, it's one thing, but I mean, you're still getting that, like you got the hood on and you're hearing the droplets hit your head all day. It's like, it's mentally tolling, man, to be sitting out in the rain.
And you still get wet. I mean,
You
you have
do.
the best rain gear in the world. I mean, I've got a bunch of gear. I've got I think some Sitka stuff. I've got some Kuyu. I've got some First Light. You're still gonna get wet. It's still gonna come in. It's still gonna come in through the neck somehow. You're gonna. It's just not. Yeah, it's nice to hike in, but sitting in the rain sucks. And then with a tarp too, you can get the tarp built. You can sit down in glass. Still have a fire next to you. It's just like you said in the beginning. We talked about having like that the mental side of it, having a stove in your shelter.
Hmm.
Having a tarp is like mentally just awesome, especially if you're
Yeah,
going to have a 6 to 8 hour rain day.
exactly. Yeah, and we have a shelter called the Silex. It's kind of like our one person tarp style tent. It's basically just a
Hmm.
diamond, and I've kind of resorted to taking that out as my emergency shelter because um, I can set it up. It only sets up with 4 stakes, and if you got two trekking poles, between you and your buddy, you can set that thing up real quick. And it's like actually structured, right? So if you got some sideways blowing rain, you don't have to worry about which way do you position your tarp. You just crawl in there. And so that's kind of what I've resorted to, is more of like a tarp tent that's ultralight. But yeah, they're important, man. I mean, like I said, all the Alaska guys have them. So if the Alaska guys have them, you should too.
That Silex, is that a spike camp style tent you would run or no?
It is, yeah, yeah. It's a one person. It's small, but yeah, I mean it's like 17 ounces, um,
Really?
and literally sets up in 45 seconds.
So
We did a
similar. That's
video.
about. I want to look at that too. It's something similar to running a bivy but bigger, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And you can get your gear in there with you.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's got two vestibules.
Yeah, that's something I can look
Yeah.
at too.
Hmm.
Um, the hard thing is like I'm typically always have someone with me, right? So I'm like this year I'll have a freaking camera guy on like the majority of my hunts. I'm gonna be hunting like 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm bringing someone along on all these hunts. So I gotta have a shelter for him, or I'll have like one of my kids with me or a partner. So like it's like I'd love to have a single person tent, but I can't pretend like there's other people not there, you know. So I like the idea of
Yeah,
the Cimarron and getting other guys in there and doing that. Um, let's talk about the stoves and the best way to use them, all that stuff. I would love to hear from the experts because there's a bunch of keyboard warriors that'll tell me about it, but I want to hear from you about stoves and how you run it and your thoughts are.
of course. I mean, so before working at Seek Outside, I had never run a stove. I actually, the first time I heard about Seek Outside, I was hunting with my buddy, and he had a Seek Outside tent with the stove. I think it was a 4-person teepee or 6-person teepee. I can't remember. It was a while ago, but you know, he invited us over into his tent. We were kind of at a little campground just at night. We got in that tent. It was super warm. It was like, oh man, that's awesome. I was living in Georgia at the time, and then moved up to just happened to pick Grand Junction of all places, and Seek Outside was here, and I was like, oh, that'd be awesome if I could work there. So, um, but yeah, the stove. I mean, that's what we're famous for, man. I mean,
Mhm.
and that's why the hot tent specifically is becoming so common amongst hunters because it really does change the game, man. It's like you can it's kind of like gaiters, I think, right? Like having a good pair of like storm-worthy gaiters. You can hunt without them, and if you got a good pair of calf high boots, um, you know you can hunt without them. You're going to get wet eventually, especially if you're trucking around in snow all day.
Dude, when it wicks down into your socks, there's nothing worse. When
Exactly. Yeah.
you're sloshing around in water, I had it happen this year. It sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yep. Exactly. So I kind of think of it like that. It's like it's not a necessity, and our stoves, with the exception of kind of like the two biggest ones that are kind of more designed for like our big outfitters tents and stuff like that, they're not going to go all night. They're more for you know warming up when you get in the tent, especially like I always reference November mule deer hunts because you got the time change. You're getting in the tent at like 5:30, 6 o'clock. You have a lot of time to hang out with your partner. If it's just headlamps and jet boils, it can I mean you can survive. You
Yeah.
can deal with it. But if you have a stove in there, especially we just came out with a new glass door that provides a lot of light, you get sitting in there and it's just truly a morale boost. It's something that makes it so much easier to get up the next day at 6:30 in the morning and truck another 10, 12 miles, whatever you're doing, looking for mule deer or elk. um, I really do think they're a game changer. The Probably the best thing that they provide is being able to dry your stuff off, right? So
Because it's a dry
those
heat, right? So
exactly.
you're gonna, yeah, it's not like using propane where it's a wet heat, it's a dry heat, so it'll really take the moisture out of stuff.
It does. Yep. And I mean, it'll, if you get that thing ripping. So we've had a couple customers. There's a guide that I kind of work with. He's one of our close friends, and he's got a little Kestrel, and he always takes that thing out with he's got a 16-person teepee
Oh,
and a
jeez.
Cimarron. Yeah, he's got the big boy. He's a guide. So, but he guides out of Wyoming and Utah, and he is always sending us pictures of his Kestrel in the tent, like up at the top. For anybody that doesn't know, Kestrel is your weather station, your portable weather station, and he'll have that thing ripping at. If you put it up at the top of the tent where all the heat kind of consolidates, you can get that thing up to 100 degrees, and that's when it's 10, 15 degrees outside. So you can really get that thing ripping, and just being able to dry your stuff off. I mean, you can dry some wet socks out in 45 minutes to an hour if you have a nice line going across the stove to where you can drape those wet socks right over the top of it. So doing that, and I mean, if you're hunting in the snow, man, and if you don't have a stove, I don't know if anybody out there has ever tried to put on like frozen solid boots in the morning, but it
Yeah.
is horrible. I've been to the point where I didn't have that when I didn't have a stove, and you're like trying to breathe on it. You're trying to throw your Bic lighter to it. You're trying anything just to get that thing to crack open. So being able to dry stuff off, morale boost, and warming your boots up, uh, warming your boots up is probably the three things that I use that most for.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try it out this year. I do have a November mule deer hunt. I don't know that I'm going to backpack that hunt because I'm bringing along one of my kids, my buddy Jake, and a film guy. We might backpack a little bit. I feel like those November hunts, I need a little more mobile. So I don't know if I want to pigeonhole myself into a backpack hunt. I might be a little more mobile than doing some day stuff. Maybe some overnight stuff like hiking a few
Mm.
miles. It just I want you're going to find the deer, right? Because they're moving. So I don't know. We'll see. But that'd be a great tent for that. Is using that TP with the stove. And I definitely want to do some spring bear stuff. I know it's great for that. Um, with that, you guys make how many size stoves?
So we basically make like eight.
Oh, geez.
So we have like our standard, because we have two versions that are the ultralight version, which is like our U-turn. Basically, it just takes some titanium foil and wraps around the side for the sides. If
Mhm.
anybody's ever used a cylinder stove, like a titanium cylinder stove, it's very similar to that. But then, yeah, we go all the way from like our medium, large, short, extra large, and then our big mama is kind of the biggest one. So yeah, we make a, I mean, shoot, we make a stove jack for that Silex, that one person. So you can throw like a medium stove in a Silex, and you got a hot tent, a solo hot tent for 16 ounces, or sorry, 32 ounces with the stove,
Really, the
and
stove only weighs 16 ounces?
the stove itself, and then you
Tent
had the
weighs
stovepipe, and it gets a little bit
okay,
heavier,
so
but it's
32 ounces. So you're 3 pounds all in tent, around 3 to 4 pounds all in for a tent, stove, everything.
exactly, yeah,
That's slick.
yeah. But then we go, we have our big mama, and we have our heaviest tent is the courthouse, which is kind of like our wall tent style shelter. And you can get that set up for, 15 to 17 pounds, again, depending on what stove and what size stovepipe you want.
So I actually just left my father's company, duck manufacturing company. So I built my own stainless steel wall tent stove, but
Nice.
it's out of 1/8 inch stainless and it probably weighs 150 pounds. So what you're
Yeah.
telling me sounds appealing, even though my
Yeah.
stove it will outlast the apocalypse. A
Oh, yeah.
nuclear bomb hits, this thing's gonna last. But what you're telling me sounds pretty nice. So when you're running these stoves, so like, let's look at the Cimarron. So I'm looking to get a Cimarron this year. What stove am I going to get? Like I call you up. What stove am I buying? I feel Cimarron is probably your number one seller. I imagine. Am I wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cimarron.
Cimarron, Red Cliff, and 8-person, which is like basically the 2-person hot tent, the 3-person hot tent, and like the 4-person
So
hot tent.
maybe I'll do
That's,
the Red Cliff because that's a 3 person. Maybe I'll do that.
yeah,
I'm thinking,
you can fit 4 in there if you need to.
not with the stove though.
With the stove, yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll do the Red Cliff instead of the Cimarron because I already have the silver tip. So maybe I do.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say I get the Red Cliff, and then I can fit
Mhm.
my kid, a film guy, and me in there with the stove. so
Oh, yeah.
So I get the Red Cliff. What stove am I buying?
So I'd probably try to talk you into the SXL. That's honestly my favorite stove. It's the S stands for short. So it's basically our extra large stove, but we just cut it down a little bit just to, you end up saving, I think it's like 7, 8 ounces.
Mhm.
But you get a very similar sized burn chamber to our extra large. And that thing, you can keep it going. You can keep it going all night if you want to. You got to stoke it. You got to add wood. But whereas opposed to like some of our smaller stoves, I mean, it's not realistic to keep them going all night.
You're burning
So
like finger size wood, right? Is that what I'm getting, right? So the SXL, I can actually get some like bigger logs in there, not logs, but bigger 2 inch diameter or something. Versus with the smaller stoves, you're running smaller wood.
yeah, so the smaller stoves you could probably fit like a 2 to 3 inch diameter piece of wood in there, but it's going to be like 6, 7 inches long.
Okay.
That SXL, if you go to the gas station and you get a bundle of wood there, right? Most of those wood pieces are cut to 17, 18 inches.
Hmm.
You can take like that diameter, you just have to trim it down to closer to like 13, 14 inches to be able to fit
Okay.
it in there. So you can fit like sizable wood in
So
there.
like wood. Yeah, you can get like some
Yeah,
actual branches in there, not just the stuff you're breaking with your hands. Like,
exactly. Yep.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So SXL, Red Cliff. What is that costing me? What are my weights?
SX
No, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So a red cliff with an SXL stove. So we have like a thing called the hot tent combo, right? Which is you get your liner, um, which basically makes the shelter into a double wall shelter, which is pretty important to protect against condensation late in the year. So we have that hot tent combo, which is what most people end up going with. If you have the red cliff, the SXL stove, and call it a full liner, you're looking at probably, I think, like $1,200 would probably be in the price range there. Just off the top of the head, just it'll depend on some of the options that you go with, but and then you're looking at probably 8 pounds for that whole setup there.
And you splitting that up. So the tent weigh, what is the tent weigh?
The Red Cliff Way. So we have two different versions. We have the light version, which just has one zipper door, and then we have the standard version, which has two. The light is going to be 4 pounds 14 ounces, and then the standard is going to be 5 pounds 3 ounces. The SXL stove, again, like depending on how much stovepipe you want, is probably going to be sub 3 pounds, and then the liners are that extra pound, to get you there.
Okay. Now, what if I want to do the Cimarron? What am
Mhm.
I looking there? Same stove or different stove?
You'd probably want to go with a little bit smaller stove, probably a large. Now, and the Cimarron is so I was explaining earlier, we have our U turn, which cuts like on the large stove, you end up saving about a pound in between that standard and the U turn, which is pretty significant. A lot of people don't like the U turn because it's a little bit more difficult to set up. I shouldn't say a lot of people. Um, the complaints on the U-turn are that it's a little bit harder to set up, and I think a lot of it comes from people take it out for the first time in November on a mule deer hunt, and they're trying to set the thing up with like cold hands and a headlamp and all this stuff. If you burn it in at home, which basically the thing about burning it in, if you start a fire in that titanium stove, all that metal is going to get a memory to it, so it makes it so much easier to set up that second time. And so, getting back to your question, I would probably say like Cimarron and large U-turn is the ultralight option,
Mhm.
and you're looking at for that whole stove is like 2 pounds. So Cimarron is 3 pounds 3 ounces. You're looking at the stove for two, and then the liner probably another pound. Um, you're looking at 6 pounds for that whole setup, and then it's going to be closer to $1,000 for the whole thing.
Okay. So you're saving 2 pounds though.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, yeah. No, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go Red Cliff or I want to go the other way.
Yeah.
This is some good stuff, man. You got me excited about the teepees because I'm thinking about these hunts now. I'm like, oh, that'd be really nice to have on a few of these hunts this fall.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
staying in the
and
tent and
so one other thing to get you going here is we just came out with this new shelter called the Twilight, which to me is probably the most, in your words, bitchin' shelter that we have.
SoCal, dude, bitching.
Oh, I love it. No, I love it, man. I was a big fan of the Sandlot back in the day when I was a kid, and that's where I first heard that word. But the Twilight, it's kind of really the first of its kind in terms of this shelter. So it's basically it's it's a two pole design. You got one taller pole, one shorter pole up front. It's got the zipperless design there, so you save a lot of weight. But it's probably the most storm worthy shelter that we have. It's got a ton of guy out points. It's very similar when you're thinking of like of storm worthiness. It's very similar to like how Hillebergs work and some of those like super hardcore four season shelters work, just with the shapes, the design of it, and all the guy outs and stakeout points that it has. But it's it's lighter than a Red Cliff by about 12 ounces, 12, 13 ounces.
Okay.
It's got the zipperless door, but you can literally set it up to where it's essentially a wall tent in there. So the two pole design, you got so much space inside there for, again, I keep,
Right. So much space for activities.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I keep harkening back to the November mule deer hunt. First off, because I love hunting mule deer, but also because that's the that's what these tents are made for. Um, you're getting in there, like it's just so nice to have that space. You can run guy line in between both of the poles to dry stuff off,
Okay.
and
I'm looking at it right
so
now.
I would definitely look at that one because it's pretty sweet. It's first of
So
its
is that a
kind.
3-person with a stove?
Yeah, you can fit three in there. We like to call it like a luxurious two, but you could definitely fit three in a stove in there.
Okay. So, but I
Mm.
could definitely fit like me and my 10-year-old and somebody in there.
I would, yeah, for sure.
That's for sure. Yeah, that's a bitch.
Yep.
It is more like a wall tent. I like that design. That is really cool. I'm looking at it right now. It's not one thing I like about it is it doesn't have, which is a complaint I have about teepees, is they're steep walled, right? This one kind of
Hmm.
comes out and then goes down. So you have that almost like that wall tent design where you have like the 2 foot coming up and then it tapers
Hmm.
in. So it goes straight up and then comes in. So you're gonna get that space up against it. Because with the tarp, with the teepee, yes, they're roomy, but my experience is like to get that room, you're slipping up against the wall and then you're getting wet
Yeah.
sometimes, right? Because your sleeping bag's touching that wall and then the condensation's coming down on me and it's getting me wet.
Yep. For sure.
Now,
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say this Twilight, we kind of came out with a new floor system for it that you can run a stove on top of. So it's
On top of the
again,
floor.
yeah, and this is,
Really?
I don't know if any other companies have this, but it's got basically a low liner that protects you against drafts. It helps mitigate condensation. The we designed that tent to where it kind of you can pitch it all the way down to the ground if you want to, but you can also elevate it, 2-3 inches up off the ground to get airflow through there. And then you have this floor system with these walls on it that blocks the draft, so you're not, when you're sleeping at night, you're not getting that draft in there, but it airs the tent out and minimizes condensation more so than any of our other shelters.
All right. So now I've switched 4 times on our tents I'm buying this year from you. I'm gonna end up with a whole closet full of Seek tents. Again, I have a thing for tents. I probably have as many tents as I do guns now. I love tents. I love testing gear and using them.
Yeah.
So now, okay, so now I'm buying this Twilight.
Hmm.
What does it weigh?
So that one, I believe it's 4 pounds 2 ounces. That one has a bunch of different options because you can actually run it like purely on trekking poles. So the back
One
pole,
pole holds it up, or do you need to double the poles in the back?
it's two trekking poles in the back and then
Okay.
one up front if you want to. You can also, but again, you can get the carbon poles so that you don't have to worry about running with trekking poles
Mhm.
there. But yeah, I think it's 4 pounds 2 ounces with maybe the back pole. Um, so yeah,
Which, if
super
anyone
light.
doesn't know, I make a bitchin' trekking pole adapter for teepees and for this thing here. So in my mind, I'm like, wow, I
Exactly.
can take my kids out because I would probably want to run this summer and try it out. Take my kids out, trekking poles. There's our tent. There's our tent poles.
Boom.
Um, so it weighs 4 pounds. What stove am I running this? Am I running that smaller one, the large, or am I running the big guy?
That one, you basically have the choice of any stove you want.
It's
It's
lower. It's not as tall, so you probably don't need as much of a stove, right, to warm it.
I have an SXL stove, and that's what I use for honestly the majority of my hunts and trips. But the great thing about like the size of that one, and like you mentioned, it's a little bit shorter. The heat kind of piles up.
Mhm.
It's not like an 8-person teepee where it's 8 feet off the ground where that heat is kind of condensing. So you can use like a small stove in there if you want to, like a large or a medium. It's going to heat it up the same. Um, but yeah, I really like that SXL. I mean, it's a little
Okay.
bit heavier, but it's worth it.
You said 3 pounds, right?
Yeah, yeah, with the
Your
with the
average tent,
stovepipe.
I mean, like, I full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Hilleberg, so
Mhm,
I have a few of their tents, I run them a lot. They're heavier by
mhm,
nature, but I don't
mhm.
care because 'cause they're just nice tents. They're around 4 pounds, so if I'm splitting it up and I'm taking this 4-pound Twilight in my pack, and then I'm giving the 3-pound stove to my partner, um, we're still less than carrying a tent or right there, the same, right? It's not like, you know, so it's not that 3 pounds is not terrible. And if you're saying that'll burn a lot better and be more enjoyable, why not have that stove, right?
Exactly. Yep.
That's why I like talking to the experts. All right, so now I'm
So
buying
we
a
can
Twilight and a SXL stove. Sweet. Um, well, dude, I kind of talked your ear off for an hour. We like to end this thing with anything else you want to talk about before I bring you into a hunting story?
No, man, I think that's it. I mean, just shoot. Uh, there's a lot of tents, like you were saying. There's a lot of tents out there, and so do your research. But I do feel like in terms of hunting tents, we make about the best there is out there. There's a lot of great brands, and you know every brand has their different lane. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, give us a call. We'll talk you up, and we'll try to sell you the thing that you need for your shelter for your hunts.
Yeah, one thing I can say is you guys set the bar. You guys are the bar by which every other teepee is measured, every other Florida shelter is measured, and I appreciate that about you guys. And appreciate that you guys are not done with just having the silver tip, the Cimarron, the Red Cliff. You guys said no. Let's continue to innovate and do things. You continue to do things, which is pushing the industry further and further forward. Being stagnant kills companies, and you guys are continuing to evolve. And you could have stopped at those tents, and you didn't. So awesome on that. So, dude, we like to end with a hunting story on this podcast, and it could be any hunting story. It doesn't need to be like the biggest bull, because if it was my story, it wouldn't be the biggest bull because I've never killed a giant bull. It could be just be your favorite hunting story. It could be a funny story. It could be a story with your dad, your grandpa, or just an all around story where you just killed a monster. I don't care. Just give us a hunting story, dude. Let her rip.
Yeah. All right. Let me think for a second here. Let me got a got a few that I could go in on, but all right, that's the one. So as a person, I was kind of raised in hunting. My dad was a big hunter. My grandpa was a big hunter. A couple of my uncles big hunters. So I kind of was always blessed with. I mean, that was ingrained in me at a young age. I was 3 years old, sitting in. My dad was a big waterfowl hunter.
Mhm.
So I
In
was three
Georgia,
years old.
Georgia.
No, Colorado,
Oh,
Colorado,
Colorado.
and
Okay,
yeah, I moved to Georgia after high school there.
okay.
But but yeah, big waterfowl hunter. Um, but long story, to not get into the weeds there. I mean, I was blessed to have a great role model in hunting and kind of showed me the right way to do things. We got after it, got a lot of knowledge from him. So I personally always try to kind of pay that forward. So um, I one of the things that I like to do is take out new hunters and people that are interested in it. I wouldn't say that I'm going around recruiting people, but if I'm in a conversation with somebody and they're super interested in joining in becoming a hunter and getting their own food and just experiencing nature how it should be experienced, I I'm happy to oblige and help out. So the this story takes place, I think it was in 2021, and it was actually my first year back in Colorado after I lived in Georgia, and I had been doing a lot of scouting, and I had all these areas that I'd wanted to check out because when I was living in Georgia, I came back every year to elk hunt, but it was just one spot, and I did some hunting in Georgia, but not nearly the amount that you can do here in Colorado. They're just you could hunt squirrels and turkeys and deer and pigs, but it just wasn't the same. So I had all these areas that I wanted to scout out, and um, I ended up getting like three or four. I guess it was six of us. Um, six of my five of my buddies who were from out of state, just old people that I knew, high school acquaintances, people that I'd met throughout the years, and a few of them had wanted to do an elk hunt, and couple of them lived here in Colorado. So, but I had this one spot that I really wanted to get into, and and it it was a hellhole. It was one of those spots where, but here in Colorado, if it's over the counter, that's where you got to get into to get into elk. And so all these guys, they had been training for years, for not for years, but for months to get in here. They'd been doing the whole, getting acclimated to high altitude and taking the vasodilators. They were super prepared. At least you'd think that, right? There's an amount of preparedness that you plateau at when
You are
you're
never
talking about
prepared
high.
for an elk hunt.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, so anyway, we get into this spot, and it's like just a treacherous drive in. I had never been down this specific road, and just looking at Onyx, I was like, oh, it'll be easy to get in there. Looks like a nice 4-wheel drive road. We got trucks, we got some built out rigs to where we can make that happen. It wasn't. It turned into more of like a rock climbing type thing. But anyway, we get into the spot, and man, we had a great hunt for the first couple days. Got into elk. It's 6 people. Taking 6 people on an elk hunt is not always the most um, productive way to kill a bunch of elk. You're loud. You're trying to figure out everybody's kind of what their level of how hard they can go, where they can hike into, what they're wanting to do. Anyway, we'd been hiking down this drainage basically every day for like 3 days straight, and because it was the spot where all the elk were. And I ended up going with 2 other guys because we kind of ended up splitting the groups up so that we weren't all covering the same ground. And we end up going into this area. And I don't know, for anybody that's hunted in certain parts of Colorado, there are certain parts where oak brush is the primary vegetation. Oak brush, chokecherry, serviceberry, all those like
Just
little,
tearing you up.
tearing you up, and it's like 5 feet tall, so you can't like get under it, you can't go over it.
You just gotta
It's
push through
horrendous.
and cut yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Now the great thing there is I've found elk in those type of areas are super vocal, right? Because they're not
Mhm.
able to just see each other. They know that they can come to within 10 yards of something and of a hunter, and he might not even have a shot to
Mhm.
put an arrow in him. But anyway, we get down to this drainage, and at this point, you're waking up early and putting a lot of miles on every day. And I I should have kind of known the situation and been able to gauge these guys better, to see that they were kind of wiped out and didn't have the most energy. But anyway, we go down this drainage for this afternoon hunt, and this one guy, we get down there, and he is shot, man, and he's from sea level. And obviously props to the guy because he was busting in his behind to keep up with us, and he was not complaining. But he just got to the point where he was like, I got to go up to camp, man. I got to chill for a day. And so we're like, all right, cool, man. Let's walk you back to this little, trailhead, this game trail, so that you at least know where to go. And so we walk him over there, set him off on his way, and me and my other buddy go to sit over this wallow to hang out for the afternoon. Well, we're sitting there for like 45 minutes, an hour, and we hear this bugle. I was like, was that a bugle? And I was like, nah, it's such a weird time for them to be bugling. It was like, 2:30 in the afternoon. It wasn't like it was like prime rut. It wasn't like September 21st or anything like that. Um, and so we're sitting there, and he bugles again. I was like, that can't be an elk. They're like, that's just for highly pressured Colorado elk. I could not see them bugling 2 times back to back just like that. So it must have been a guy. And so we kind of ignore it, and we're sitting over this wallow, and all of a sudden we hear help, and we can't really tell what it is. We're like, is that because the other group that we were with had there was like a T in the trailhead, and they had gone right and we had gone left. So I was kind of wondering. I was like, are they just like trying to signal us to get back to them? Like, did they get an elk down or something like that? Because we all had Garmin's, but sometimes it's tough if one guy's got a Zolio, one guy's got a Spot. You can't always communicate. Um, so we end up we're kind of just chilling there, and we hear it again, and we're like, oh shoot, like I bet they're calling us. It's all distorted. We can't hear exactly what they're saying, but we're like, they must be calling us to get back to this meetup point. So we go back to the meetup point, and nobody's there. And sure as day, we hear more clear because we were closer. Like a for sure help, and we're like, okay, that's not good. And we don't know who it was. We're kind of like, oh man, does that sound like this guy? I won't use his name, but does that sound like this guy? They're like, nah, I don't know. It doesn't really sound like him. Well, let's go check it out. Obviously, somebody is needs some help here. So we spend probably an hour and a half trying to get from this trail through this. I mean, it was the thickest part of this mountain, just crawling under chokecherry, serviceberry. We almost had to like pull the machete out. We were trying to use our knives to like cut little twigs and branches to get through this area, and all the while we're hearing this help get louder and louder, and we finally get to the point where we're like, all right, that's our boy. So we're like yelling back to him, hey man, we're coming. And we end up, like I said, it was about an hour and a half to get from this trail. I mean, it was probably a half mile to where he was at. Well, this guy had ended up taking a wrong game trail from that main trailhead, and he got cliffed out. And it was like a combination, because the way he described it was he was trying to crawl through this oak brush, and like down on his hands and knees, and in doing that he got cliffed out on this mountainside here. So we end up having a freaking bushwhack to get to him, crawling over logs and stuff like that. And um and we finally get to him, and he looks up at us, and he's like, thanks for listening to my bugle. We're like, oh man, we had just spent so many calories trying to get to this guy. We ended up bringing him back, and we kind of ended up following the trail that he had took to get to this mountainside. But it was a good kind of lesson on just especially when people aren't familiar with an area, and they aren't I mean, if you get altitude sickness, even if it's a low degree, that can really mess with your mindset, right? You
Mhm.
kind of get disoriented and all that stuff. And even though people have Onyx, sometimes it's hard to find your way out. So it was a good lesson on just making sure that if you're taking a new hunter out, somebody that's less experienced, just make sure that you are with them, man, because like that could have easily turned into a super bad situation if we had gone even like 200 yards on the other side of this mound. We wouldn't have been able to hear him. So I guess that's not necessarily a hunting story. It's more of a just kind of a funny story now that it turned out all right, but it could have gotten real dangerous. So anybody taking new people out, just make sure that you are on them, and you help them out, and not to overestimate the all the effects of being in a new spot.
Yeah, 100%. There are no shortcuts in the backcountry.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes there's a point of no return, and it's better to turn around before you get there, right? When you start
Yep.
pushing into something and you're like, I don't know about that. It's like you trying like, well, I'll go this way instead because I don't want to go the way I just came. Going the way you just came is probably the right answer like 90% of the time. like
Yeah,
like I swear, like you go, it might take you a little bit longer to go back the way you just came, but when you try and go a different way that you don't know because you didn't like the way you came because it was hard, and dude, I swear, like 9 out of 10 times, you just end up screwing yourself. It just
for
sucks.
sure. Well, and that's kind of one of the things with Onyx now is yes, it's great because you can scout out areas, but you can also it's so much easier to look at your computer and be like, oh yeah, that's a hillside I could
Dude,
get onto. And then you get there and you're like, there's just no possible way that I'm getting to this spot. And in a situation where you planned your whole hunt around that, getting into this one area, say you're backpacking in, and you get to that spot and you're like, well, that's not happening. That can be a wasted day. That could be a big waste of calories, big waste of energy. So you gotta be careful for sure.
I'm taking Mark Livesey. You know Mark Livesey?
Yeah, yeah.
Tree Line Pursuits. I'm taking Mark's e-scouting course right now. So I'm
Okay.
going through the whole thing. I want to learn. Like I want, even though I consider myself good at e-scouting, I want to like learn from that. And because there's so many times, like you said, where I've Google Earthed it, I've looked at it, and it's like you get there and you're like, that is so much bigger than I thought. Like you
Yeah,
go into the Frank or you go into like Hell's Canyon, Oregon, or even Colorado, like it's just bigger than you think. Like it's
yeah,
just steeper than you think, nasher than you think. And Mark has some really good tips on that and like being able to really evaluate and use all these tools to figure it out. So that was a good podcast, dude. You guys have a podcast yourself, right? I
we do.
really I
Yep.
really enjoy that podcast. What is it called?
It's just the Seek Outside podcast.
Yeah, you guys are as creative as I am, the Tricer podcast. But I actually really
Great
enjoy it. I
point.
listened to it a bunch last hunting season. It's a lot of really helpful tips and just stuff that's just like common knowledge to you guys. It might be common to everybody else. So I really enjoy that podcast. You guys check them out. Where else can we find you guys?
Yeah, the website is seekoutside.com. Again, pretty creative. But yeah, we got Instagram. We got a YouTube page, which has a lot of good. First off, we do a bunch of like kind of expedition type films, and not just hunting. We do a lot of stuff that's not hunting that kind of showcases how you can use the gear. But then we also have lots of informational stuff, how to set up tents, comparison videos if you're looking at buying something. So definitely
Mhm.
check that out. Instagram, our email. We have a customer service team that is right here in Grand Junction, and they all use our stuff like every weekend. That's kind of a requirement of getting that position. So everybody there is super knowledgeable. Um, so yeah, hit us up, man. I mean, if you got any questions, we're happy to talk. And shoot, we have it's kind of how I started was just in customer service, kind of getting to know the product, and we uh, we have a lot of guys that just call in to talk hunting or fishing or whatever. So if you got any good share stories to share, give us a shout.
Awesome, dude. Let's do it again. Go check out Seek Outside.